Hey everybody, I'm Patrick Osborne. Here, that's me. Um, this is drawn by Adam Green. He's an animation supervisor at Disney, working on Moana now, who I sat next to for the last like 7 or 8 years. I've been an animator in feature films since 2003. I have theme music. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit how I got involved with Google Spotlight Stories and Pearl and my path to there. I've been animating at Disney for the last 7 or 8 years. I had the opportunity to work on some amazing things. I've been into non-photorealistic animation rendering in general for the last 7 or 8 years. And that started with the program at Disney called Spark, where you could, it was kind of spend a month of your work time doing whatever you wanted with a group of friends as long as you showed it to the studio. And that led to the technology that we used to make Paperman, a short there a couple years ago. And then from that I got the opportunity to direct Feast about 2 years ago at Disney Animation. And all those projects experimenting in non-photorealistic rendering. So after Feast, and I had lots of opportunities came up, and when you go around, or when you leave a studio and you go around to start pitching things around, there's a lot of time in between getting a lot of those big projects up and running, and you want to stay creative and do something interesting. And Google had just done Duet with Glenn Keane. They were doing On Ice with Shannon Tyndall, and they were very enthusiastic about taking this non-photo thing and pushing it on it a little harder, especially because it was going to be on a mobile device, so you can't really, the technology isn't really there to do something completely realistic, so non-photoreal is perfect for that. So I'm going to tell you what it's like to actually direct something in VR. I have had a lot of experience in regular filmmaking and animation, and to be able to do something in VR seemed interesting to me. I like to kind of try to stretch myself and do things that are maybe a little bit different. So this kind of came from that. And we'll talk about pitching in general in Hollywood and what we do. Actually, do you guys mind? I need to see my notes and they're not showing up here. Actually, screw it. I'm not going to show my notes. So when you go around, Dan Harmon says that pitching is really like telling your friends about an amazing television episode. And that's how you kind of get people interested in the story and an idea. And I had met Jan Pinkova in Annecy, a festival in the French Alps, and they told me, think about what you would want to do with this idea of telling a story in full 360 degrees. And for me, the core of a pitch is trying to find a bunch of things that are interesting to you and then combining them in some kind of way that's a little bit unexpected and different. So I started thinking about this idea about VR and what people were saying was difficult and what people had started to do in this kind of mobile phone space. It wasn't quite clear that the headsets were going to be like a real thing yet. So they were all sort of in the process of growing. Oculus was on like their first kit at that time. So when it started, this was just going to be something for mobile phones. And people weren't really cutting in VR films, but I thought that if you had some kind of space around you that was consistent, then you could actually probably get away with cuts, and it would be not disorienting to a user. They wouldn't have to figure out, or to an audience, they wouldn't have to figure out where they were when each cut happened. So we came up with this idea of maybe it was set in a car. So it all started there. If you're sitting in a car, then you have a framework that we all understand, and we all know what's forward and backward, and I felt like cutting would be possible. We could cut what's outside, you could have different types of weather, you could have different times of day, and that would probably be okay. And then I think about, from there, you think about how to pull a story out of something like that. Well, a car to me it's kind of a symbol of freedom, at least in our culture. This idea that when you're given a car, you can now kind of get out and go around, do what you want. Cars are passed down. All of our first cars are usually given to us by our parents. They're usually kind of an old junker. Mine was this '89 Honda Civic hatchback that was actually stolen. My dad bought a stolen car. And the FBI took it back 2 years after we had it. Not my dad's fault, but it was stolen nonetheless. And but this idea that like cars are passed on, and that there's something special and important to us about cars in our culture. And I also love folk music. I go to South by Southwest every year, so I thought, well, what if I could combine this car concept with music in some way, and that kind of leads you to this idea that it's probably like some kind of road trip. Maybe it's a guy that's touring around the country in his car. And that feels like something that could be fun and interesting. It doesn't feel like something that a lot of people are doing with VR. And I thought about, what else do you pass on? You pass on in your car, but you also get from your parents your passions for things. And my dad was a toy designer. This is me as a model in the 80s on Care Bears. And my dad was a toy designer at Kenner, and he also drew a lot of cars. We would draw together. So this idea that maybe the story could be a musical thing, but about passing on talent. And my dad, when Kenner closed back in '91, it was sold to Hasbro, and they moved to Baltimore. But to keep my brothers and I in the same school and with our friends, my dad decided to kind of give up on that career and his passion for the sake of us. So the story kind of fell out of that. What if we had this music, and it's a guy touring around the country, and he has to give that up for the sake of his daughter, but his daughter learns how to play because of him and becomes successful off of that. And I feel like there's something there for me, or there was something there. And once you have that, that's my general pitch. I just say, I want to make something. It's for my dad, and it's about music, and it takes place in a car, and we're going to do cuts and try to excite people, the whole team, everybody that you involve yourself with at Google, to do that, to get on board. And the pitch is really that, getting everybody excited, getting the whole team kind of pumped on making something that means something, and that comes from a real place, and that is trying a few different interesting things. So then you get into story structure. I'm used to storyboarding my films, but with virtual reality, it's actually really, really hard to storyboard properly. The tools, Photoshop doesn't exist in a sphere around you, not really yet. The VR tools weren't there yet, like Tilt Brush and stuff. So you start thinking about ways to wrap your head around what that story could be. I tried to use the song itself as structure. I feel like everybody knows this idea of a pop song, that there is a verse, a chorus, a verse, a chorus, and a bridge. And that kind of format seems to be something that is in us because we've heard so many of these pop songs. So being that it was song-based in the first place, layering on another level of depth in the storytelling like that seemed to be worth doing. When I started at Google, they gave me one of their famous conference rooms covered in whiteboards. It's very different than the typical story room at an animation studio where it's all like note cards pinned up on walls, but it's just as effective. We started planning out what that story might be. I wrote a script, but it ended up being kind of useless. Sometimes when you're coming up with a story, you just sort of throw as much at the wall to inspire yourself and try to get clarity as possible. Occasionally writing it down helps. In this case, not so much. What did help is my crazy person chart here. And this is me trying to structure the various paths of the characters and their relationships to each other through time. So trying to figure out, and I don't expect you guys to be able to read all this, but what these moments are and what that energy level and that flux is going to be. So I took that and I handed it off to Pollen Music Group, and they put together a bunch of demos for me to listen to, and a song by J.J. Weasler and Alexis Hart ended up being the one we picked, called No Wrong Way Home. And we went in and actually recorded in a studio that song sung by Nikki Bloom and Kelly Stoltz. Really fun. I've played music my whole life, so to get to go and hang out in a recording studio like this is absolutely amazing. And Nikki played on Colbert last night, actually, with Ryan Adams, which is pretty cool. And we recorded that whole version, and then it turns out later we ended up having to record it all again, which I'll get into when we get into the VR part. So this version of the song is what we actually were at this point. And this is me trying to do some version of storyboards, and the songwriters were kind of playing to that. You can see a bit of what it is. It's more about getting the feel of the film than it is actually telling the story.
I hope your dreams don't feel small. When the wind begins to rise, I hope your mast stands straight and tall. These are fragile times. We blur the lines. In the unlikeliest of places, we all find a little grace. There's no wrong way home.
So once that was kind of played to music, we sort of got a feeling of what it was going to be like to actually make this film, or what it might kind of turn out like. And then regular storyboards, like I said, weren't quite working for me, so along with the storyboards, we realized that quickly that we were going to have to do a 3D previs, a sort of fake VR version of the film, to try to see if these cuts and all this stuff would work together. This isn't the kind of thing that we could really watch in VR yet. It was sort of a test, and we could put this simple version, onto our phone and move around with the camera and try to see what it was like. It became clear, though, really quickly that until we actually saw all of this together working, you weren't really going to get the whole feeling, because all of this stuff needs to add up to something that, the sum is kind of, it's all in there. You get the idea. So the next challenging step of all of this is trying to figure out how to make something that actually looks beautiful and runs on a mobile device, on a cell phone that's a couple years old. So one of my theories in making great stuff, and what I always try to do, is just to surround myself with people that I admire and that I find are doing amazing things. I reached out to Tuna Bora, who is a really incredible illustrator who does a lot of work in television commercials and advertising. And what's really awesome about Tuna is her style ranges massively, but she does these little polygonal, beautiful things that look like they could be low poly artwork, and actually it felt like what we were trying to do with this story in this low res, low poly type of rendering would work really well with what Tuna was doing. She agreed to come on, and we started trying to figure out the design language of the film. At that point, we asked a character designer named Orrin Haskins. He works in fashion illustration mainly, and he's actually the grandson of Sam Haskins, a Hollywood photographer. And he really understands this kind of taking design in geometric shape and making it interesting and unique and feel special. I really loved these early designs, and part of the reason the characters in Pearl are so kind of lanky is because they come from this fashion illustrator. Really long legs. I know Kelly Stoltz, the singer, when he first saw that version of himself, he was impressed at how handsome he was and how long his legs were. And all of this, trying to figure out these characters, you're always keeping in mind that the final rendering and the final look has to be simple and clear as well. So our exploration here is really just to find what do hands look like, what do faces look like, what is the hair going to look like, how is this all going to work together. And it ends up being a lot of a back and forth between the actual modeling and color to make it kind of work on the phone, but it's good to have a nice stylish place to start. For this film, we ended up with 15 characters, and that's more than a lot of features have. It's a heck of a lot of rigs to make. It became quite a production once we actually figured out that this was the level of our design scope. But nothing's worth doing if it's not a challenge, so we had fun. Along the same time as that, you want to make sure that your characters are going to fit into a world that has a complementary design language. So we reached out to a couple artists that I really love to do that as well. One of them was Emmerich Kevin, and he was the background designer on an anime series called Ping Pong, and he now works at Riot Games. but he is wonderfully good at this impressionistic realism. So we needed it to be simple, and we wanted it to make. I didn't want it to be like just simple textures. I wanted it to be like actual polygons that you were making the artwork with. And Emmerich was really great at kind of bringing the essence of these objects down to a simple look that was translatable for what we were doing on the phone. And then Willie Real designed these cars on the left, and he kind of went into the vehicles and tried to make sure that they fit into that world as well. And we rounded our environment team out with this guy, Kevin Ruan, and he was just out of school and really excited to kind of jump into this, and he also had a very particular look that was simple and able to make something beautiful with this simple poly look, and very impressionistic and naturalistic in its lighting, but also kind of planar and poly. One thing that was a challenge to these artists was that we were designing this world all around, and similar to storyboarding, it's very difficult to actually paint full 360 around you right now in the tools that they're used to in Photoshop. So these are a version of how we kind of got that to work, where we had a little layout of the car and what those frames were going to look like, and they painted within that. And then also figuring out even like all the little details of what the world can look like simply. This is Sunmin In doing some passes on props and corn that you're passing by in the field, which became an interesting challenge because there are so many of them, and even simple poly corn, when there's like 10,000 corn stalks, becomes a big deal. When you're finishing an image, it's very important to actually have things that unify the image together entirely. And when Tuna paints, she does that by using blooms and film grain and these effects that kind of blend the edges and take this polygonal look and pull it into a third dimension. And all of these things, all these ideas that we figure out as we're designing things, are bringing up challenges in the actual creation, because we need to find ways to actually do that on the phone in real time at 60 frames a second or more. But it's really nice for the team to have these really solid, very specific and very beautiful pieces of artwork to start with as guides. And the mandate here, and luckily Cassidy Curtis, our technical art supervisor, was on board with this challenge, is to actually make it look just like this, or as close to as possible that we could get. So that becomes the difficult part. And luckily, ATAP is some of the best people I could find. There's an amazing team there that are willing to take challenges like that and run with it. So the process at ATAP starts with a thing called a proof of concept, where we took these two images and we decided to start making them. This is before we had figured out the real design language of the film. So this is like way early in the process, at the same time as we were doing story. And this is our version of that proof of concept. And it was just something that worked on the phone and that had a cut in it, so we could kind of see what that was going to feel like. We could actually get the phone out and use it and switch between these two shots. And we took 6 weeks to get this up, and it proved to me a lot of things. It proved that this framing thing was possible, though you had to be very simple and specific about what you were changing in the shot. If too much stuff changed, you kind of, depending on what window you're looking at in this particular shot, it works more or less, and you can actually learn from that. We decided that a heavy realistic texture thing was not going to be the way to go, that the simple polygonal look was going to be where we were going to aim. And but in general, we thought, okay, it might work. The cuts could be a thing. It turned out that because we didn't have music in this, the cut feels nice and solid, but figuring out how to actually load all these scenes while the music playing became a huge challenge. Tuna did a couple of these style guides for a level of detail as we were making the film, to try to figure out exactly how much detail we put into things at different distances. And then Cassidy Curtis went and did a bunch of exploration on edge treatments and how to get this brushstrokey kind of broken edge. And we didn't end up going with these specifically, but what we did end up doing is getting an edge that to me, it was kind of like an artistically driven version of aliasing. We wanted a crunchy edge, like it was torn paper a little bit, but it wasn't exactly. It was like there's something beautiful about aliased and jaggy images in a way. I know it's SIGGRAPH, it's kind of the anti thing, but there's something cool about that for me. But being able to control that was important. So in these experiments, we were kind of aiming towards that stuff. Controlling lighting is also very important for me. If you look at what Tuna does in her Photoshop work, a lot of her light is not very realistic. It's like selections that she's basically masked off a dark and a light shape. And regular toon shading doesn't give you the control of that kind of light and dark shape that we wanted. So Cassidy built in there a way to actually control those things. And this is our version of the edge treatment. Got things out of order a little bit. And these little light shapes that you see on their heads here are actually, and the light as it passes through, are using just geometry. It's just masked geometry that lets us decide if the light or the dark shape is being visible. And all of that adds up to making an image that feels a little bit more crafted and a little less automatic. And that was the goal, to make it try to look like as much as we could like the art that we were starting from. So directing in VR, I slowly realized that there's this problem where you can be a director and you can make things as compelling as possible to look at, but chances are that people won't see everything. So I thought, how do we make sure that the audience still gets the story even if they're not looking in the way that you thought they were going to look? And I think this comes down with trying to support the story with every choice that you make. So if you think of your toolbox, this is me trying to plan out exactly where people were going to look or where the best way to look was going to be, and you realize that you can plan all you want, but people aren't going to do it. So even if I put all the action in one spot and match cut on everything, it's still going to be difficult. What you can do is make sure that your set dressing tells the story too. So say if the people are looking in the back seat and they really just see props changing, but the story of this family that's living in their car over time and that kind of lives in that car, and their stuff clutters and their instruments pile up, and you can tell the seasons by the way that by the weather outside. It seemed like a really cool way to get story in the set dressing. And then on top of that, you're telling story with color. So this is Tuna's version of some of the color keys of the short, but you see that in the beginning, when it's more of a memory, when it's more of a romantic period, it's more rosy. And then towards the middle, it gets a little bit darker and grayer and less saturated, and then becomes kind of party colors in the middle while she's on tour with the band, and then back to those rosy colors at the end. And we thought, if we can tell the story in the props, if we can tell the story in the color, if you tell the story in the music, you also have the song over top of everything that's kind of giving you an idea of what's happening, then hopefully it's more like a theater production where the audience is sitting and letting the film wash over them, allowing the story wash over them, and they just feel it. And even if they don't see everything, then you get to actually still kind of get the story. And I've noticed when watching people watch it on the Vive, where we get to actually see what they're looking at, sometimes it's frustrating that they miss major moments of the story that we all love, but you realize when they take the headset off that they still had the feeling, that the impression of the film still sunk in. So I feel like it pretty much worked. And the film's abstract enough anyway to you can put yourself into it. So I feel like people do that as well. It turns out that recording the song for VR is actually a very important thing. Scott Stafford at Pollen Music took his crew, and they actually put the microphone in a car and re-recorded our singers singing in the car itself and outside of it in all the proper places to get real proper 3D stereo binaural sound. And I learned a lot about this. It turns out that the equivalent of ray tracing in sound is something that we can't really do in real time, all that bounce. And that's very important with spatializing yourself. If you just have a sound emitting from a point in space, it's relatively convincing, but it's not completely immersive because you're not hearing all the proper bounce. So recording it in a car with a microphone in the right spot, with the singer in the right spot playing a guitar in the right spot, really does ground you a lot more than just simple sounds in space. This little piece on that.
Winter coat, two wild eyes, all the unspoken love that you carry inside is in the calmest days. Seem like it that way. Won't you rest a while in the storm's peaceful light? It ain't where you've been, but where you're going to. Where you're going, where you belong. There's no wrong way home. There's no wrong way home.
It is really cool to get to, when Pollen had the song written, we did about 12 different demos, and they gave me a blind taste test of that because they didn't want me to be pushed or pulled by being a mega fan of any one of them, and some of them I was. And so I could just pick the song that actually worked best for the film. And I'm really happy we ended up on Alexis's song, but I had never met him or heard of him before. So I have a little trailer to play for the film. Have most of you seen it so far? And if you haven't, it's in the VR Village downstairs. Hopefully the lines aren't too long today. But this is a little teaser for it. We have made it for theatrical presentation where I went into VR and actually shot the film myself and recorded. We recorded that data and kind of printed it out as a regular theater film. It's also on the Google Spotlight Stories app, on YouTube, and on the Vive. Thanks. I finished a little early here, but we have time for lots of questions if anybody wants to talk about this short filmmaking in general. Because this is Autodesk, I should say that we used Maya for all of our 3D animation and modeling. The engine is from Google Spotlight Stories itself, and Shotgun, one of Autodesk's tools, was the center of our production pipeline. It allowed us to work with artists all around the world, which is really cool. We had a few people at the studio called Evil Eye in San Francisco, a bunch of people at the Mountain View headquarters of Google, and then about half the team was in Scotland or Australia or in Virginia or wherever they lived at home working on this. And it's really neat to be enabled by a tool like Shotgun to keep it organized and give notes and make films with a studio that doesn't exist, that's kind of in the air. Raquel.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, thanks for coming. It's a beautiful film. Thanks for the film. My question is, well, now that's all done and it worked and is really nice, it seems simple to make, but I bet when first Google approached you with that idea that you never done before, probably was a little bit unsettling. I just wonder if there is any moment that you freaked out and maybe you thought, what the hell I'm doing? This is not gonna work, and how you manage into the production.
Yeah, I think the big secret about making movies and films is that you're constantly thinking, what am I doing? And you're also constantly figuring out that the world's gonna figure out that you don't know anything. I've heard a lot of people talk about that idea, that like this imposter syndrome where you feel like, oh, I shouldn't be here, I don't know what I'm doing at all. And you sort of learn to trust instincts and go with ideas and like run with things that feel good to do. So if something starts to feel like uneasy or like I'm feeling like this is not my place or I don't have anything to say, that's when I get worried. But if it feels like it's coming from the heart and it's a story worth telling and the potential for making something great is there, you have the right support, and you know the team is going to be capable of doing it, then it feels like it's worth doing. It's not as scary. But of course, the whole time, you know, as Cassidy will tell you, Cassidy Curtis, who was instrumental in making all of this work on screen, we didn't know if any of it would work. The cuts themselves were not actually working smoothly until the scenes were seriously optimized. So that meant we had to be done with the art for months before we could actually see the film play through all the way and see how it felt without hitches in the middle. And hitches when you're in a musical are really noticeable. Any kind of little gap of sound is really, it pulls you out. So we all kind of took it on faith that the ideas were all good and that they would add up to something interesting as long as it paced out right. And that's what you hope for. So yeah, it's like you don't know what you're doing and you know you're going to make some mistakes, but Jan Pinkava, luckily, the creative director there, is really excited about the mistakes. ATAP is a group at Google that shoots for very difficult things in the first place. So to be in that group is very supportive because you can misstep and it'll be okay. So I think it's essential when you're doing creative things to let yourself make those mistakes. And you know, we had a few kind of versions that weren't quite working, and we had way too many shots. The cuts we realized were just too fast for VR. People were disoriented because they were forced to reset themselves every once in a while. So we learned, and for example, the first shot, when it starts, you just sit there, and if you don't look towards the front of the car, the short waits for about 30 seconds so you can just like enjoy looking around a little and what that's like before the story actually kicks in. And there are several places in the story that stretch like that just to make sure that the audience is like with you the whole time. And that's stuff we had to figure out. We weren't sure about that, and you realize something feels weird about the story and you fix it. And as long as you're in a supportive team, it feels okay. So
Thank you.
it's a long answer to that question. Thanks.
How you doing?
Good.
Julian, first of all, fantastic film. You talked about use polygonal masking to control the shadows. Is that something proprietary, or is that something just a general technique in 3D that you can use? And can you explain a little bit more on that technique?
Sure, yeah. Cassidy, who invented it, is right here, or used it. There's a thing called render buffers, where you can, in a real-time rendering situation, you can create various images all at the same time, and you use them in different ways. So we basically had a shader that rendered certain shapes into a black and white image that was like basically another layer that was used as a mask. And that layer you can use that layer to kind of affect things. And I think that's a fairly common thing that's in various game engines. The nice thing is that we had the ability to, because it was our own engine, to mess with it and optimize it as tight as possible.
So that was my next question, is like, how did you get it into your rendering engine? And
Yeah.
it used it. So the VR environment was your own proprietary. It wasn't Unity. It wasn't Unreal. Okay.
No, it was they've been working with their own engine because it needs to be so tight and small, and the engine actually runs in the YouTube browser. So when you go to this on an Android phone in your YouTube app, it's running a game engine, not a video. And it's very optimized to be able to load into your phone that quickly, and that's why. If you have real detailed questions about it, Cassidy can answer them after this, because he actually dealt with the nuts and bolts of that stuff. I just reveled in the luxury of having an engine that I could mess with from the inside out, which was cool. So, next question.
Hey, I'm Thomas. This work is so awesome, and just want to ask you if you're going to do some more. Is the team ready? That deserves a series, I think.
Oh.
You're going to do some more.
Well, thanks. I try to make everything exist in its own little scope, whatever it is, because with Spotlight Stories, these are just out there to be interesting things for people in the world to see, and I think it's really cool.
Single shot, right?
Yeah. I mean, Google's putting them out as their own. They're free. They're out there for people to watch, and Google's continuing to make them. Me myself, I love this. I love the VR thing. I have a Vive at home now. I download everything. I'm obsessed with it, and I'm excited about making more stuff that way. If it if it comes to pass, I don't know. It requires making something like this requires a team, 25, 30 people at least. It's about the same as making an animated short, maybe even a little bit more difficult, because nothing can leave frame. So it becomes pretty, it's a challenging thing, and to have the support of a company that's willing to kind of do that for the sake of the art, yeah, it's really cool. So they continue, but I move on to other stuff. Yeah. If there's anything else, otherwise you can always just approach us outside around here for the rest of the day, or go down to VR Village and watch it on Vive yourself. I think that's a cool way to do it. I wish you could get, after making this and then watching it on VR, I kind of wish that every film I've ever worked on, I could just sit in the VR version afterwards and enjoy the world. I know that doesn't really exist, but there is nothing outside the frame usually. But it was a really cool experience to kind of make a film and then sit inside of it and go down and enjoy it. And thank you.